Albert Einstein. His name became a byword for genius, but behind it lies the story of a man who spent most of his life swimming against the current. In this video, you'll learn why his early scientific papers went unnoticed, how he came up with ideas that changed physics while working as a clerk in a patent office, why he refused to take part in building the atomic bomb and still felt guilty, and why in old age he was convinced he'd ended up in scientific isolation. We'll talk not only about his discoveries, but also about simple, personal moments, how he wrote letters to his children, argued with colleagues, and kept trying, to the very end, to understand how the world works. Suggest topics for new videos in the comments and subscribe to the channel. Bedtime stories come out here every day.
The beginning. The city of Ulm, spread along the banks of the Danube, had no great renown in those years. It wasn't a center of science or culture, and hardly anyone could have guessed that it was here, in an ordinary house on Bauerstrasse, in the late 1870s, that a boy would be born whose name, decades later, would be associated with the very nature of time and space. His name was Albert, and he was the first child of the Jewish family of engineer Hermann Einstein and his wife Pauline, a musical, calm, and strict woman. The birth was uncomplicated, but even in the first months, the baby's peculiarities worried his mother. He seemed too quiet, too pensive, as if immersed in a world that had nothing to do with the restless life around him. He began to speak much later than usual, preferring long silences and, as relatives recalled, first mouthing words in a whisper, or even to himself before daring to say them out loud. The doctor saw no cause for alarm, but the family, especially his mother, couldn't shake the sense that the child was developing differently from other children. They did not yet know that this very trait, inner focus, a contemplative bent, and a drive to seek meaning on his own, would one day form the foundation of genius. When Albert turned 1, the family moved to Munich, where Hermann and his brother Jakob opened a small electrical engineering firm, the Einstein & Co. Electrical Partnership, producing arc lamps and electrical equipment. It was in this city that the future scientist's childhood and some of his school years passed. Albert entered a Catholic primary school, where, despite being Jewish, he felt comfortable. He was neither a troublemaker nor a withdrawn recluse, but from an early age showed a particularly independent cast of mind. Classmates sometimes found him odd. He rarely joined games, often gazed thoughtfully out the window, and in class would ask unexpected questions that were hard for teachers to answer. One of the first vivid memories Albert kept for life was a little compass his father gave him when he was about 5. He was struck that the needle always pointed north, as if obeying some invisible force. This discovery sunk deep into his soul. He sensed that the world was not only as it appears to the eye, but governed by unseen laws. Later he would say that this was when his hunger for understanding awoke. When Albert turned 6, he began violin lessons at his mother's urging. She herself was a decent pianist. Though at first indifferent, he learned to take pleasure in music. He especially loved Mozart and Bach, and in later years often said that music helped him think. Studying at the Luitpold-Gymnasium in Munich proved difficult, less because of academics than because of the school's strict discipline. Einstein could not endure authoritarian rules, disliked coercion, and often clashed with teachers. He didn't argue openly, but his stubbornness and refusal to follow templates caused resentment. One teacher once told him, "Your presence undermines the respect I command in the class." Episodes like that only strengthened his inner drive for freedom and independence. At age 12, he stumbled upon a textbook of elementary Euclidean geometry that made a deep impression. He called the book sacred and studied it on his own with extraordinary enthusiasm. Geometric proofs, in which logic led to exact conclusions, seemed to him pure and beautiful, like music. Soon after, the family ran into financial trouble. The electrical enterprise went bankrupt, and in 1894 his parents and younger sister Maya moved to Italy, first Milan, then Pavia. Albert was left in Munich to finish school. But the atmosphere at the gymnasium became unbearable, and after a few months he took matters into his own hands. He quit without a diploma, obtained a doctor's note for nervous exhaustion, and left for Italy to join his parents. He was only 15. He spent several months outside formal education, teaching himself. He read scientific books, wrote essays in philosophy, and pondered the nature of light and space. But he understood that without formal education, continuing a scientific career would be hard. In 1895, he applied to the Zurich Polytechnic, an elite institute that admitted students regardless of nationality or background. He failed the entrance exam, excellent scores in math and physics, weak ones in literature and French. Even so, the faculty saw his ability and recommended a preparatory year at the cantonal school in Aarau. There, in Switzerland's more liberal and open educational environment, he felt truly free for the first time.
Student and free thinker. When 18-year-old Albert, having completed the preparatory course in Swiss Aarau, arrived in Zurich, he immediately felt he was in a place where no one would force him into a mold. The Federal Polytechnic, ETH, renowned for its openness and academic freedom, admitted him to the teacher training track in physics and mathematics. The studies were demanding, but not in the way Einstein usually found things hard. He handled math and physics with ease, but grew increasingly irritated by formalistic teaching. His relations with Heinrich Reber, a professor whose courses he considered outdated and superficial, were especially tense. Not inclined to hide his views, Einstein allowed himself ironic remarks and sometimes simply skipped lectures. This naturally hurt his standing. Despite his obvious talent, most professors did not warm to him. Later, it was Weber who would refuse him recommendation letters, shutting him out of an academic placement right after graduation. Conflicts with the system in Zurich notwithstanding, he gained something vital, a bond that for years would be a source of both inspiration and contradictions. Among the few women on the course was Mileva Maric, serious, reserved, from Serbia, with a bright mind and a sincere passion for science. They were drawn together not only by physics, but by an intellectual kinship. They spent hours discussing Maxwell, read Poincaré, and exchanged letters about the nature of light and the structure of the ether. Einstein wrote her about his hypotheses, worked through calculations right in his letters, and shared doubts. In one letter, he fondly called them a single thinking machine, an image that aptly captured the closeness they felt while working together. His studies were uneven. In subjects that truly gripped him, he shone. Others he simply ignored. As a result, he lost the support of faculty and received no job offers after finishing his degree. His exam scores in core subjects were high, but the overall impression of him as a potential teacher was mixed. Attempts to get a post as an assistant failed. Weber and others refused to write recommendations or quietly passed over his candidacy. The next few years were a time of anxiety and forced humility. He scraped by, giving private lessons, sought any job he could, and wrote dozens of letters pleading for a position. At one point, he even considered working at an insurance company. He taught for a while at a technical school, gave math and physics lessons, and worked evenings to pay for rent and food. In letters to Mileva, he described not only his love and scientific ideas, but also his fatigue, irritation, and sense of dead end. A way out came thanks to his old friend, Marcel Grossmann, a former classmate. Unlike Albert, Grossmann was diligent and organized, and his father, well connected with officials in Bern, helped arrange an interview for Einstein at the Federal Patent Office. Despite lacking formal training in law or engineering, Albert was hired. impressed as they were by his unconventional thinking and his ability to grasp the essence of technical descriptions. In 1902, he began work as a technical expert, third class. The job involved routine review of patent applications, assessing their originality and practical applicability. For most, this would have been dull, almost mechanical work. But for Einstein, it proved unexpectedly fertile. He wasn't overloaded with overtime. No one demanded template-based reports, which meant he could think. Careful study of technical diagrams honed his spatial intuition, and constant reference to operating principles strengthened his feel for how things work. He carried scraps of paper, sketched formulas in spare moments, and in the evenings plunged into theoretical problems that wouldn't let him go. He lived modestly in a small flat on the outskirts. In his free time, he met with friends, Maurice Sullivan and Conrad Habicht, in a circle they wryly called the Olympia Academy. They discussed Poincaré, Spinoza, and Kant, swapped books and letters, and spent evenings debating the meaning of science, the role of intuition, and the limits of reason. It was not idle talk. In these conversations, with total freedom of speech, Einstein first began to seriously formulate ideas that would later underpin his miracle year. In 1903, he officially married Mileva, and a year later, their son, Hans Albert, was born. The family lived on a modest salary, but without hardship. Einstein read, wrote, and reflected. He was far from academia, no professorial chairs, no university lectures. But in these quiet years, among stacks of patent applications and desk drawers full of diagrams, and in his notebooks, is what would soon upend physics began to take shape.
Annus Mirabilis. In the mornings, he walked through the streets of Bern, slowly, almost absent-mindedly, in step with an inner dialogue that continued even as he walked. He passed shop windows, storefronts, and post boxes, stopped at the door of the old stone building on Gemplatz, and climbed the stairs to the Federal Patent Office. He didn't stand out. A worn coat, slightly tousled hair, a piercing, thoughtful gaze. But behind that ordinary appearance was a man who in the span of a single year would write 5 scientific papers that radically changed our understanding of matter, light, time, and energy. Still working as a third-class technical expert, in 1905, Albert Einstein, alone, without access to university labs or departments, without support from academic circles, wrote the papers that became the foundation of modern physics. He wrote late at night at the kitchen table, when the flat was quiet, his son asleep, and the day's work behind him. That year he formulated ideas that would later be called the start of a new scientific era. In the spring came the first paper, on Brownian motion. The phenomenon, microscopic particles suspended in a liquid moving chaotically, had been known since Robert Brown, but no one had provided a rigorous physical explanation of that randomness. Einstein proposed that the visible motion of particles was caused by impacts from invisible molecules of the liquid. Using an equation, he showed how the observed trajectories could be used to calculate molecular size and number, thereby proving that molecules were not an abstract hypothesis, but real. This was a crucial confirmation of atomic theory, seemingly obvious by then, yet still not universally accepted. The second paper dealt with the photoelectric effect, the emission of electrons from a metal when light strikes it. Classical physics couldn't account for the results. They didn't depend on light intensity, but depended strictly on its frequency. Einstein offered an unexpected solution. Light behaves not only as a wave, but also as a stream of discrete quanta. He proposed that each light quantum, later called a photon, carries energy proportional to its frequency. The formula he used said, Overall energy equals Planck's constant times the frequency of light. It was for this work, 16 years later, that he would receive the Nobel Prize, not for relativity, but for explaining the nature of light. In the summer, he published a third, most audacious paper on the electrodynamics of moving bodies. In it, he questioned two central ideas of classical physics: the absoluteness of time and space. Einstein formulated two postulates. First, the laws of physics are the same for all observers in uniform motion. Second, the speed of light is the same for all observers regardless of their motion. Astonishing conclusions followed. Concepts like simultaneity and duration depend on the observer's motion. Time became relative, and space did too. If one observer moves relative to another, their clocks tick at different rates, and their rulers measure different lengths for the same object. Thus was born the special theory of relativity. A fourth paper followed, deepening the mathematical description of moving bodies, refining relativistic mechanics, and introducing formulas describing how mass and velocity affect behavior near the speed of light. It complemented the previous paper, grounding it in equations and examples. And finally, in a fifth short note published in the autumn, he formulated the idea that would become the most famous formula of the 20th century. Energy equals mass times the square of the speed of light. From this, it followed that mass is a form of energy, and that even a small amount of matter contains colossal energy. Einstein didn't present this as a sensation. He derived it almost in passing from the preceding reasoning. But this formula would underline nuclear physics and shape the trajectory of 20th century discovery. All the papers were sent to Annales der Physik, one of the leading scientific journals of the time. The editors, led by Max Planck, treated them with respect but without fanfare. Most physicists had not yet grasped the scale of the change. Even Einstein himself did not seek recognition. In letters to friends, he spoke of the work with light irony. "I have a few papers here, perhaps at least one will interest someone." He didn't know he hadn't merely contributed to science, he had shifted the very foundation on which it stood. In 1 year, without leaving the patent office, without attending scientific congresses, without holding a professorship, he wrote 5 papers, any of which could have been a lifetime achievement for another physicist. For Einstein, it was only the beginning. He still had no academic post. His name was not echoing through universities. He kept going to the patent office, reading technical descriptions and scribbling formulas on scraps of paper that would later hang on the walls of universities around the world. 1905 entered history as the miracle year, not because Einstein became famous, that would come later, but because in that year one person, armed only with reason and a pen, with no laboratory and no institutional backing, created a new physics in a few months.
The road to world fame. Outwardly, Albert Einstein's life changed little after the Annus Mirabilis. He still worked at the Bern Patent Office, reviewed applications, arrived at 8 a.m., wrote reports, signed documents, and chatted with colleagues. But in the scientific world, a shift had begun. His papers were being read, discussed, and, most importantly, taken seriously. The first to respond was Max Planck, a professor in Berlin, one of the greatest physicists of his time and the founder of the quantum hypothesis. He not only read Einstein's papers, but publicly recognized their significance and began corresponding with the author, still virtually unknown. Planck's support was the first step toward recognition. It didn't open doors instantly, but it soon led to changes in Einstein's fortunes. In 1908, he was appointed Privatdozent at the University of Bern. The position was unpaid, but conferred the right to lecture. He still worked at the patent office, but in the evenings gathered small groups of students. His lectures were marked by freedom of exposition and a genuine passion for the subject. He spoke without notes, chalked formulas on the board, and explained them with a lively voice. Students remembered him, though at first he didn't see teaching as his calling. The very next year, he became a docent at the Zurich Polytechnic, his alma mater, his first real university appointment. In 1911, he was invited to the German University in Prague as professor of theoretical physics. There he began to work intensively on gravitation and space-time curvature, thinking seriously for the first time about extending relativity. A year later, he returned to Zurich, now as a professor at the University of Zurich. And in 1914, he accepted an offer from Berlin, becoming a member of the Prussian Academy of Sciences and director of a newly created physics institute at the Academy. The terms were unique: no teaching required, and a state-guaranteed salary so he could devote himself entirely to research. In Berlin, he completed what he had been working towards since 1907, the general theory of relativity. Back in Zurich, pondering how to explain gravity within his framework, he arrived at the idea that acceleration and gravitation are equivalent, the principle of equivalence. He imagined a person in a closed cabin, unable to tell whether they are in a rising elevator or standing on a planet's surface under gravity. This led him to the conclusion that gravity is not a force in the classical sense, but the result of space and time being curved in the presence of mass and energy. To express these ideas rigorously, he had to turn to mathematics he hadn't previously mastered: tensor calculus, learning it with his university friend Marcel Grossmann, now a professor of mathematics. Progress was agonizing. He adopted one set of equations, then abandoned them, made mistakes, started over. Only in November 1915, in 4 presentations to the Prussian Academy of Sciences, did he present the final form of the field equations of general relativity. Mathematically complex, they yielded a striking physical picture: gravity as geometry, space-time curving under mass. The scientific world did not immediately grasp the magnitude of what had happened. The theory seemed too abstract and too hard to test. But Einstein knew it made a concrete prediction. Starlight passing near the sun would be deflected. That could be measured during a total solar eclipse, if one only waited for the right conditions. Those arrived with the eclipse of 29 May 1919. On the initiative of British astronomer Arthur Eddington, expeditions were sent to Príncipe off the west coast of Africa and to Sobral in Brazil. Despite logistical difficulties, political tension, and unstable weather, both teams obtained the necessary photographic plates of star positions near the Sun. Data reduction took months, and in November, the Royal Astronomical Society announced, "The observed effect agrees with Einstein's predictions." Newspapers ran headlines: "A new theory of the universe," "Newton overthrown," "Light bends." Albert Einstein's name instantly became known beyond scientific circles. His photo appeared on front pages. People who had never cared about physics began talking about space, time, and the bending of light. For the first time in history, a scientist whose work was not about machines, medicines, or practical technology, but pure theory, became a global celebrity. People recognized Einstein in the street. He received hundreds of letters. He was invited to universities, clubs, editorial offices, and political and philosophical gatherings. His image, shaggy hair, open collar, and old jacket, became a symbol of wit and independence, of genius. Asked how he took fame, he said, "When they asked if I was surprised by the eclipse results, I answered, no, I would have been surprised if they hadn't agreed with my theory." But fame had its price. A noise he had not sought arose around him. His personal life began to crack. His long-strained relationship with Mileva neared rupture. The sons lived apart. Detractors appeared, nationalists and anti-Semites. He felt mounting pressure, scientific and human.
Scientific and personal revolutions. After the triumph of 1919, when the eclipse results confirmed his theory, Einstein's name spread far beyond the scientific community. His image, tousled hair, deep gaze, disdain for formality, became almost mythic. Newspapers published his portrait and musings. Magazines attributed aphorisms to him he'd never said. People who had read not a line of physics debated the curvature of space, the paradoxes of time, and the famous formula. He became a symbol of the independent mind and intellectual daring of a new century. Behind the facade of worldwide fame, however, lay deep personal contradictions. His marriage to Mileva Maric, once a close union of two thinking people, had long since turned into a source of pain and tension. Estrangement grew. Einstein was increasingly away on business, at conferences and on trips, while Mileva remained alone with the children. He felt misunderstood, she felt lonely and resentful. Their conversations grew shorter, letters drier. After long efforts to preserve the appearance of a family, they officially divorced. The terms were unusual. In a letter, he promised that, should he ever receive a Nobel Prize, he would give her the entire monetary award, not as an act of penance, but as financial support for her and the children. When, in 1922, the prize was indeed awarded, formally for his discovery of the law of the photoelectric effect and his services to theoretical physics, he kept his promise. By then, relativity was recognized and famous, but still contentious in the Nobel Committee, which chose to cite the safer contribution. In the world's eyes, though, the prize acknowledged all his work. That same year, Einstein grew close to his cousin Elsa Lowenthal. Practical and serene, not a scientist, she made life easier for him. Elsa became his helper, companion, and later his second wife. They married soon after the divorce from Mileva. Elsa ran the household, filtered his correspondence, organized the day-to-day, and served as a buffer between Einstein and the outside world. He often said he owed her his peace of mind in the stormiest decade of his life. In the 1920s, he traveled widely. In 1921, he first visited the United States not only as a scientist, but as a public figure. His trip included lectures, meetings with Jewish organizations, and the beginning of his involvement in creating a Hebrew university in Jerusalem. He was not a religious Jew, but considered it important to take part in building a cultural and intellectual Jewish future. In 1922, he visited Japan, where he was received with the fervor reserved for the most respected figures. He lectured, received delegations, and, despite the cultural distance, felt deep sympathy for the country. Meanwhile, a threat was growing in Germany. After the First World War, the country was in political and economic crisis. Radical ideas gained strength. The far right branded Einstein a symbol of harmful Jewish physics, issued pamphlets denouncing him as a pseudoscientist, and publicly threatened him. His name appeared on lists of Germany's enemies. His colleague, the mathematician and political figure, Walter Rathenau, was assassinated, and Einstein feared for his life. He began refusing public events, carried a revolver, and soon seriously considered emigration. In 1932, as the situation worsened, he and Elsa went to the United States, at first intending to return. But in January 1933, when the Nazis came to power, he decided firmly not to go back. He resigned from the Prussian Academy of Sciences. His property in Germany was confiscated. His books appeared on lists to be burned. His name in Nazi pamphlets was marked undesirable. He severed all ties with German institutions and remained in America. Soon he was offered a permanent position at the newly founded Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, a research center without teaching loads, granting scholars complete freedom. Einstein settled in a small house on Mercer Street near the campus. His days grew calmer. He read, walked, played the violin, and met with colleagues. He renounced German citizenship and became a U.S. citizen. Elsa, already ill, died of kidney disease in 1936. Einstein endured her death, retreating into his work. He still pondered the nature of gravitation and searched for a unified field theory that would combine all the known forces. He often said he was not interested in quantitative successes unless they reflected an attempt to see order. His pursuits became almost philosophical. He sought in nature's laws an internal completeness, beauty, structure. But Princeton's peace did not mean tranquility. The world was approaching catastrophe again. Germany prepared for war. Scientists began to realize the possibility of a new weapon based on the very equations he had once jotted on a scrap of paper. He felt an anxiety he couldn't dispel, and he knew he would have to take part, not as a physicist, but as a human being.
Einstein and the war. From youth, Einstein did not believe in the power of arms. During the First World War, when the vast majority of German intellectuals signed manifestos supporting the Kaiser's army, he was among the few who refused. Together with several colleagues, he signed the Manifesto to the Europeans, a short, restrained, but principled appeal to reason and humanity. At that time, his pacifism was unconditional. He maintained that a person must refuse to participate in killing, even under orders of the state. He saw war not as valor, but as a catastrophe of the spirit. The 1920s and 1930s shook his idealism. Einstein was among the first to grasp the scale of the threat posed by National Socialism. As anti-Semitism and aggression grew in Germany, he realized, in the face of absolute evil, helpless pacifism is a form of inaction. His personal experience of exile, burned books, confiscated property, open threats, radicalized his political stance. He still dreamed of peace, but no longer believed that good would win on its own. In the summer of 1939, his colleague, the Hungarian physicist Leo Szilard, approached him. Szilard reported that Germany was conducting intensive research on uranium fission and that there was a real danger of an atomic bomb. Einstein, though not involved in such research, knew enough physics to understand the gravity of the situation. Together they prepared a letter to U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, pointing out that scientific developments might lead to a weapon of unprecedented power, and that the United States should begin its own research as soon as possible. The letter, signed 2 August 1939, became a turning point in the history of science and war. It was delivered to Roosevelt by Alexander Sachs, an economist and White House advisor. The initial reaction was cautious, but within months, organizational steps began that would later become the Manhattan Project. Einstein did not participate in it. He was not invited, in part because he lacked the necessary security clearance and had long since left applied physics. But he knew he had helped set the process in motion, and he understood he would never forget that. When, in August 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Einstein was shaken. He hadn't expected it to happen so quickly and so brutally. He did not condemn the decision of the American command in the harshest terms, but he made it clear this was not science's victory, but its defeat. He wrote, "Had I known that the Germans would not succeed in developing an atomic bomb, I would never have lifted a finger." The oft-quoted line expressed not so much repentance as a bitter realization. He couldn't foresee everything, nor could he stand aside knowing what the Third Reich was capable of. After the war, he became one of the most active advocates for international control of nuclear weapons. Together with Szilard and other scientists, he helped found the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists. Their goals were public education, warning policymakers, and establishing supranational control mechanisms. He lectured, wrote articles, and attended conferences. He was no longer an isolated scientist. He was the moral voice of science, speaking about its limits and responsibilities. Science without ethics, he believed, becomes a threat.
In the New World, he insisted we can no longer think in terms of national interests alone. He wrote that the next war could be the last, and that the only path to survival was the creation of supranational structures, common rules, and accountability above flags and borders. He supported the idea of world government, an international court, and scientific solidarity independent of politics. At the same time, America gave him mixed feelings. He became a U.S. citizen and was grateful for the freedom it afforded him, but with the onset of the Cold War and the rise of McCarthyism, he increasingly felt alienated. He was troubled by the persecution of dissenters, attacks on universities, and suspicion towards scientists. He spoke out against the House Un-American Activities Committee, calling the witch hunts disgraceful. He was suspected, wiretapped, his correspondence examined, but he did not keep quiet. Freedom of conscience is not a boon that is granted. It is a right that is taken from us when we remain silent. In 1952, after the death of Chaim Weizmann, Einstein was offered the presidency of Israel. He declined, writing that he lacked both the natural aptitude for administration and the requisite experience. He remained, however, a firm supporter of a cultural and scientific center for the Jewish people, continued to support the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, sent books, and met with young scholars. He felt his era was passing, but the struggle for reason was only beginning. His letters grew shorter, but no less precise. He still believed that silence in the face of injustice is a form of complicity. He knew the value of words and wrote even when his hands tired. He received guests, answered school children, listened to politicians with wry amusement, but smiled rarely. He was the one who had watched a formula turn into an explosion, and who had spent his life trying to make reason again a weapon of peace rather than fear.
The wisdom of later years. Einstein spent the last 2 decades of his life in Princeton, in a modest house on Mercer Street, with peeling white paint, a small garden, and a wooden porch from which he set out each morning on foot to the Institute for Advanced Study. He walked slightly stooped, hands clasped behind his back, in the same rhythm in which his thoughts were born, unhurried but unbroken. He no longer took part in active scientific life, did not attend conferences, and held no chair, but he continued to think, write, and reflect on the nature of the universe and humanity's place in it. His office at the Institute was piled with books, manuscripts, scraps of letters, and equation sketches. He rarely tidied it. On the board above his desk were long familiar formulas that he still recomputed, hoping he would one day find in them the solution to the problem he couldn't let go, a unified field theory. He dreamed of a formula that would unite gravitation and electromagnetism, while most colleagues were enthralled by developments in quantum theory. Einstein did not deny its mathematical effectiveness, but rejected its philosophical basis. He could not accept that chance lay at the heart of reality. God does not play dice, he said, not just a phrase, but an expression of deep conviction. The world must be rational and whole. The probabilistic nature of quantum mechanics seemed to him a retreat from the search for true explanation. He remained alone on the sidelines of the mainstream, yet stubbornly continued along his path. After Elsa's death, he lived alone. He did not seek new close relationships, though friends, scholars, and admirers often visited. One of the few truly close people in Princeton was Kurt Gödel, the great logician and philosopher. They walked daily through campus, immersed in conversations about time, infinity, and the foundations of logic. Einstein said that in his last years, his greatest consolation was his daily walks with Gödel. He continued to answer letters. Dozens arrived each day from around the world, from children, students, engineers, anonymous village teachers.
He couldn't answer everyone, but many received short, warm, precise replies, sometimes with gentle irony, sometimes with deliberate seriousness. He knew the worth of words and chose them carefully. In some letters he shared thoughts on science. In others he reflected on life, responsibility, and peace. He did not consider himself a prophet, but he understood that people listened to him as a moral authority and did not shy from that role. His lifestyle remained simple. He wore no ties, preferred sweaters, went without socks, could go weeks without a haircut, and refused all displays of officialdom. He loathed receptions, photo ops, and interviews, yet from time to time received journalists with good-natured mockery and a stubborn dislike of foolish questions. He did not try to seem eccentric. He simply remained himself, unchanged from his patent office days. He continued to play the violin, not often, sometimes alone at home, sometimes for guests. Music, he said, helped him think. Its structure pursued the same internal logic he sought in physics. Though age made his fingers tremble, he did not give up the instrument. Music remained for him a language untouched by the noise and distortion of the outside world. In 1948, he was diagnosed with an abdominal aortic aneurysm. Doctors urged surgery, but he refused. He said he did not want to artificially prolong life. If the end had come, let it be natural. From then on, he knew he was living on borrowed time, but he didn't change his habits. He worked as before. His last years he devoted to the still unfinished theory that remained his source of hope. Despite his doubts, he rarely appeared in public, but he still made statements, spoke out against the arms race, signed petitions for peace, and defended freedom of thought. He understood his influence was waning. The world had grown more cynical and fragmented, but he kept speaking because he believed silence is surrender. He did not believe in an afterlife or expect the soul's immortality. He said, "I don't want to live forever. I want to understand the universe." For him, life's meaning lay in seeking regularities, in seeing form behind chaos and essence behind appearance. He believed the beauty of equations is not a metaphor, but a sign of truth. He died early on 18 April 1955 at Princeton Hospital from the rupture of the same aneurysm he had refused to treat. He awoke in pain, but declined surgery. His last words were spoken in German, but the nurse on duty did not know the language, and they remain unknown. Thus he left without farewells, without theatrics or pathos. Papers remained. Letters remained. Equations on the board and sketches in which, to the very end, he tried to feel out a connection not yet found. What remained was a life lived with dignity, without fear, faithful to reason. And then a new story began. The story of how he kept living in minds and hearts.
Einstein's legacy. When he was gone, there were no ceremonies with fanfares, no grand funeral processions. By his will, there were no official rites, no monuments, no long eulogies. His body was cremated, his ashes scattered in an unknown place, and his memory preserved not in stone, but in minds. Of those who thought, read, researched, doubted, and sought. His legacy proved not to be a thing, but a process, a thought that continued to live in formulas, ideas, and in the inflection of scientific inquiry. In science, Einstein became not only the author of theories, but the architect of the modern view of the universe. His special and general relativity did more than rebuild physics. They gave us a new way to look at reality. Space and time ceased to be motionless scenery and became pliable, curvable entities dependent on mass and motion. From these theories, modern cosmology was born,
models of an expanding universe, the prediction of black holes, calculations of gravitational lensing, and ultimately, the search for gravitational waves. When, in 2015, scientists first detected gravitational waves, ripples in space-time from colliding black holes, the name Einstein rang out in press releases, articles, and interviews with grateful clarity. Exactly 100 years had passed since he predicted the effect, and his equations again proved right. It wasn't merely scientific confirmation, it was a sign. His thought still works. Its depth is not exhausted. Einstein's legacy extended far beyond physics. He became a symbol of thinking itself. His name is synonymous with genius. His face is among the most recognizable in history. The tousled hair, the sweater, the slightly ironic smile, the focused, lively gaze. His tongue-out photo from 1951 became an icon of the era, not an academic portrait, but an expression of the spirit of a free mind unafraid to be itself. His name entered culture. He became a character in films, books, comics, and cartoons. His quotes, authentic and apocryphal, circulate through the internet, textbooks, and memes. And even those unfamiliar with his work know that Einstein stands for a mind that isn't afraid to ask questions. At universities, his portraits hang not only in physics labs, but also in philosophy departments. His texts are studied as examples of how to speak simply about the complex. His letters, published after his death, show what he was like: gentle, sincere and ironic in private correspondence, clear and precise in scientific writing, responsible and uncompromising in public discourse. He did not write to sound persuasive, but to be understood. He was not flawless. He argued, erred, and sometimes refused to accept the new. His rejection of quantum indeterminacy long seemed stubbornness, but today inspires respect. He simply did not want to settle for what felt incomplete. Throughout his life, he strove for wholeness, in physics, in thought, in morals. He believed that beneath the world's apparent chaos lies a coherent order, and sought it even when everything around him suggested otherwise. In school curricula across countries, Einstein is often the first scientist introduced when the topic turns to genius. His name stands beside Newton, Galileo, and Archimedes, and perhaps none of them had such cultural resonance. He became a bridge between rigorous science and the human face of reason. Einstein left more than 80,000 pages, papers, lectures, drafts, letters. The archives are kept at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, at Princeton, and in digital copies around the world. They are open for reading because he believed knowledge belongs to no one. He did not seek authorship over truth. He wanted everyone to be able to seek it for themselves. After his death, his brain, without his consent, was removed and studied. Some called it sacrilege, others a scientific necessity. Einstein might have said, "What matters is not the brain as an organ, but how a person uses it." His strength lay not in the mass of neurons, but in the ability to ask questions no one before him had dared to ask. He became a symbol of an era and remained beyond it. His ideas are built into GPS technology, satellite communications, astrophysics, and laser systems. His philosophy lives in popular science books and in dialogues about the meaning of science. His moral stance lives on in the memory of a scholar who could have kept silent but chose to speak, and in everyone who, with a child's tenacity, keeps asking, "But why?" Because that is where everything real begins, and that is his greatest legacy.